Jump here. Welcome everybody to Overtime. This is always a great extension of our broadcast conversation. And I want to congratulate our panel on an incredibly useful and I think, very civil, very informed conversation about the tragedy in Uvalde. I think we're all better off for having had that conversation. Bob, anything that you've been able to uncover? I know that you couldn't tell us about during the regular conversation.
Well, I could probably go on for about 2 hours about what went on in that hallway and the moments leading up to that. There's a lot of talk about why wasn't there an armed police officer in that building. These local small communities, Lira, you addressed the Santa Fe issue where they have 3 officers in the, 2 at the door, 1 roaming the halls, 1 in a golf cart outside. These small communities don't have those kind of resources, and they can't provide that level of protection. And it's a sad state of affairs that we know that we have to provide that level of protection. We as a society have gone way wrong, and we need to fix that. But one resource these communities in South Texas do have, and some of the poorest counties in the state, is the United States Border Patrol. They bring law enforcement resources to these communities. Many times there are car accidents, severe car accidents where people are severely injured. Border Patrol agents are the first ones to arrive on the scene, and they have EMT trained agents that arrive and provide medical care before EMS can get there. I was in Brooks County a few years ago working with deputies down there, and a woman with Alzheimer's wandered out of her house into the ranch lands and couldn't be found. There was 1 deputy sheriff on duty that night. Border Patrol agents responded not only with multiple agents, but with a helicopter. And they found this woman who probably would have died if it wasn't for the presence of Border Patrol down there. So it really makes a difference. Over 90 agents responded to the Uvalde school shooting situation, and it was 2 Border Patrol agents that led the charge in that took the shooter out. I want
to return back to something the former president said. And whether you agree with the former president or not, is it a matter of will? Mike Knox said it. We protect our hospitals, airports, politicians with armed guards, and we spent $40 billion on aid to Ukraine. A lot of us think that's justified. Why can't my dad used to call the American military the best, most productive jobs program in the United States? Why can't we make it mandatory and fund it and fund armed peace officers at schools? And they've all the districts have gotten large quantities of ARPA funds, and they're discretionary. Mm-hmm. So anyway, just want to throw that out. Bill, you have any thoughts there?
Greg, I have to agree. I mean, but I think that there is a faction in the country who is very nervous, or who are very nervous about, guns on school campuses. And we do have laws here in Texas. Schools are gun-free zones except for that officer. There's a nervousness about having someone standing there with a weapon. Some people are very alarmed just at the sight of a weapon. But, it's an unrealistic view of the reality, right? Even if you enact all these legislative proposals that are on the table right now, you still need those personnel at the schools. And as you guys have pointed out, and the president pointed out, or Knox pointed out, we have armed security in a lot of locations, federal buildings, courthouses, the airport. Why can't we have them at schools? And it sounds like we should. And, while we're comparing with other countries, a lot of other countries do that. They do have armed personnel at every school. And, that's just the reality. It's not
School funding works a little bit differently than the way the federal government funds its facilities. In Texas especially, school funding works a little bit differently than probably in most states. And most school districts only fund an officer at high schools and some middle schools. And the officer is there as what's called a resource officer. And that resource officer is there not to stand guard at the front door, but to help with problem children, and to break up fights and issue Class C misdemeanor tickets and for assaults and arrest people who are doing drugs. They're not there as armed guards to stand guard and at the front door. There's scant few schools in Texas that have what Santa Fe High School has, and Santa Fe High School has that for one reason only, and we all know what that is. And the scant few schools who have them are the ones who had a tragedy, and the school board voted it in after the tragedy. There are no school districts who have the funding available to put armed guards at the gate.
But however, Chris,
our legislature doesn't provide it.
But there are some large urban districts like Dallas, Houston, Austin, San Antonio that have police departments. They have a whole police department.
Every school district in Texas has a police department.
But some are more manned than others. And so therefore they, it's an issue of them assigning the resources and the funding to provide more, and especially at the elementary school level, even if they're outside just monitoring the parking lot, they don't have to be in the front to
and the school
Sergio,
districts invest a lot of funding into sports facilities. I mean, we're seeing these
that's different money.
Spectacular football stadiums and so forth.
That's bond money. That's different money. Houston ISD. Do
you think voters would support bond money for enhanced security at school?
That's different. That's a different funding mechanism. And HISD this year is $10 million in the hole that they have to figure out, and they have to give money to a poor district every year because of the Robin Hood. And so you have to. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just telling you that because of our legislature refuses to fund school districts and has an unconstitutional funding mechanism that they leave in place every year with Robin Hood, where large districts like Houston have to give money to poor school districts out of their budget every year. There is no money left in budgets to do what you're suggesting. And so I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying that it's not as easy as let's take an officer and put him at the front door.
Well, maybe we need a funded mandate from the state to do that. But let me add one more thing about the physical security at the Uvalde, at the Robb Elementary School. There's supposed to be a security fence around this property, around all school properties. The security fence at this school was a 4-foot tall chain link fence that any 18-year-old kid can scale in about a half a second. So there was no perimeter security for this particular school, and that's not a multi-million-dollar expense. That's a very reasonable expense to put a 6-foot non-climbable fence around these properties. There was initially information that police engaged the shooter outside the school, and that didn't happen. The first 2 police officers that arrived got there 2 minutes after he got inside the school building. There was shooting outside when this shooter got out of his truck that he had crashed into the ditch, and we don't have an explanation for why he crashed that into that ditch, but
didn't have a driver's license.
Okay.
He didn't.
So he opened fire on some people at the funeral home who came out because they heard the crash, and they walked outside and, what's going on? Do you need some help? And he opened fire on them, fired about 20 rounds in their direction. Fortunately, didn't hit anybody, but then he took off for the school and started shooting outside the school. There's a lot of talk about armed teachers, and I agree with the concept of teachers being armed if they are willing to do that and have the training and the skills to do that. But I don't think it would have made a difference in this situation because the doors were open. This guy got into that room so quickly and opened fire. A teacher would not have had time, I don't believe, to extract a weapon from wherever it was secured and put it into play. And the teacher was probably the first person taken out, I would envision. So
my colleague Natalie, he went to Navasota this week, where they have instituted a program where teachers voluntarily carry. They go through pretty extensive training. I don't know, there seems to be support for it in that particular community. I'll take you guys back about 10 years. We've had a long association at Fox 26 with Hanan Yadin, who is a expat Israeli security expert operating here in Houston, and he's been a great resource for us. He got into, and we did this report after a shooting a decade ago. He explained that in the 70s or early 80s, there was a Palestinian insurgents took over a school, and there was a mass killing. It was more than a dozen. And the Israelis said, we can't have that ever happen again. And so at least at the high school level, they secretly recruited a half dozen to a dozen young men, trained them in secret on counterinsurgency, and then secreted firearms, M1 carbines, Bob, in the school, that only in places only they knew were there. They were instructed, if there is an armed incursion, they are immediately to engage the perps and wait for the cavalry to come. The strategy being, if they're shooting at these guys, they're not executing students. I always found that to be fascinating. I don't think it's probably tenable in the United States, but we all know how serious the Israelis take security.
Right.
Anyway, just thought I'd throw that out.
Yeah, the security measures were in place that could have prevented this tragedy. Had that door been locked outside, he would not have gotten in. Had the classroom doors been closed and locked as they're required to be, he couldn't have gotten into the classroom, although he probably could have gotten into the lunchroom, so maybe there would have been a larger tragedy. But we're not following many of the guidelines. I've talked to some teachers that say, yeah, we always prop the door open. If we're running out to the car to get something or going from this building to that building, we'll prop the back door open and come back. Wood shops, machine shops, all those places have open facilities, and in some schools they're connected to the main part of the school. And so once you penetrate that weak spot, you're into the rest of the school.
Holly, Sergio, what do y'all think about these calls for a special session? Do they have merit?
I think it's, the reason Texas has this structure that we have is so that you don't have this, emotional knee-jerk response to rush out and pass a bunch of legislation without, slowing things down, taking a look at all the facts. And we're still waiting for all the facts to come out on this particular matter. I don't see that happening. I don't think that, there's will for that to happen. I think there's going to be a lot of discussion between now and next year's session, and there will be some legislative proposals, but I really don't see that happening in the next few months.
Well, I don't think it's going to happen, but I think it's a good idea because it'll bring in the experts, it'll bring in law enforcement, it'll bring in folks to look at effective practices from other previous school shootings since Columbine, since 1993. There are some lessons that are learned to minimize. Of course, we would never stop, the killings in our country, but
absolutely. And I believe there will be interim, there's going to be interim hearings, and they will be hearing from those experts, and we will hear a lot of testimony, and legislators are working prior to session, but I think it's premature to rush to a special session and, get some legislation out there in the guise of we're doing something. We want to do something that's efficacious. And
let me just add, I appreciate Bob bringing up this ancillary issue of arming teachers. I was on 2 talk shows this week on Spanish language stations regarding this issue as a former teacher, but also a lot of friends who are teachers. There's no research has demonstrated the effectiveness of having teachers armed at all that's going to save lives. They're under tremendous amount of stress. They're trained to, teach the academics, not to be police officers. They're under tremendous amount of stress. They're leaving the professions. You know, they don't feel valued and respected. However, they do incredible work, the important work. So I don't think that's the answer. That just means more business for the gun store sellers. But you know, that's all.
I got
The
plenty.
teachers that would do that probably already own their guns.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I
no.
was gonna say
Maybe in
voluntary.
maybe in rural areas is very, you know, it's an ideal, and then may work down there, and there's more support, but not in large urban cities. In large, that is not the general consensus from teachers.
So Lira,
I've got an update.
to counter, let me counter that point real quick. The concept of an armed teacher in a classroom is very young. There has, to my knowledge, never been an armed intruder go into a school where there are teachers that are armed and might have the opportunity to defend themselves. So I don't know that there's any valid data to really clearly address the effect.
What about if a student with mental illness finds the weapon from the teacher and commits another mass shooting? So those are a lot of issues that could surface, and they could happen. It's a viable situation. What about if a teacher doesn't have the mental health report and just one day it goes off and she has a weapon there? So, you know, there's a lot of dangers. You know, you're engaging when you have people in public settings like church, and I mean, a school and a church are sacred. They're public institutions that should be, I mean, it's a sad state if our country comes to the state of having all these folks armed and metal detectors all over the place. It'll be a sad.
We do have examples of churches that were attacked where malls that were attacked where an armed civilian stopped the shooter.
Only one incident. I saw that on TV. Only one.
We do have incidents, they don't make the news, but we do have lots of incidents of people using their legally obtained firearms for self-defense. And
because it doesn't further the narrative of the liberal media.
There's a lot of data that
by and large, most gun owners are law-abiding citizens and follow the laws and are using the weapons appropriately.
Let me ask you one more thing. Let me turn off my little blur here. One thing that was really important that always amazed me in school is the cell phone. The cell phones, why do we allow cell phones in school? That had always been my curiosity. Well, after 9/11, they passed legislation and local policies to allow. So for precisely this reason, what happened in Uvalde, so that students or teachers can call 911 and say, hey, we need help, come inside. That is precisely the reason why cell phones are allowed in schools.
And there were multiple calls that came out of that classroom and valuable intelligence information that came out as a result of that. I completely agree with you on that point.
Thank you.
Hey, Bill, I wanted to ask you, I want to switch the subject a little bit here because it's something we've spent a lot of time. We spent a lot of time reporting on Lina Hidalgo's administration and all the problems at Harris County. How do you see the next 5 months in this? Now we have the head-to-head Mueller versus Hidalgo campaign going on.
Well, before I get to that, I do want to put something in perspective here. The last 20 years, about 900,000 people have died from guns in the United States. A little more than half of those are suicides. Less than 200 are from school shootings. Just to kind of put this all in perspective. These are obviously gut-wrenching, highly emotional things when they happen. But, you know, if you're going to address people dying from guns in the United States, there are many, many other areas that need to be addressed in addition to this. Let me just make that point to start out with. I think that there's obviously two big cross currents going on here. Harris County's trending Democratic, has been for the last 10 years or so. But at the same time, you have a tremendous backlash against Democrats nationally right now. Biden's numbers are in the tank. And you're seeing that play out in Harris County. The turnout in the Republican primary was higher than it was in the Democratic primary this time around. Yes. And when you as I said in the show, if you're not just a partisan Democrat hoping that Lena Hidalgo is the second coming, then just make a case for me of a single thing that's happened in the last 4 years at Harris County that the county is better off than it was before. I can't see a thing. The finances were in good order. They're a mess now. They've raided the toll road authority for $300 million and just pissed that money away. Property taxes are up dramatically. Crime is up. The court system is a mess. The Harris County Jail is, it's just a hellhole. There's no other way to describe it. Every single election has been screwed up since they appointed this election administrator. The IT department is a mess. They've had multiple failures down there. I mean, you just tell me one thing that's working better in Harris County than it was, before this administration took over. I can't think of a single thing.
And I think you see it too when you watch Commissioner's Court and you see other Democrat elected officials such as the district attorney, the district clerk, and so forth, coming to Commissioner's Court to talk about the funding issues that they're experiencing and the lack of cooperation they're getting from Hidalgo's administration. I mean, that's a big deal.
You've also got the whole issue about whether she ends up being indicted in the vaccine contract or not. I mean, certainly, if you look at the facts that were laid out in the Texas Rangers affidavit, there was no reason that she wasn't indicted along with her staff. Now, let me just say, an affidavit filed for the purpose of a search warrant, you only hear one side of the story, and obviously she's got her side that she's been out there spinning with her lawyers. I don't know how all that's going to come out. I'm not making any prediction about whether she's going to be indicted or not. But clearly, and I mean, last week, she just had this meltdown in this press conference where she said she expected to be indicted and then went off on this just, really incomprehensible diatribe about how it was all these political forces aligned against her when it's a Democratic district attorney that, brought the indictment against her staff members. And I think it was Ted Oberg asked her, well, the district attorney is a Democrat, and she sort of launched off into this deal about, but they're all against me, and it's Steve Holtze and Mike Lindell and Ted Cruz, and just went on and on. Listen, I'm thinking, I don't think Kim Ogg is really close to any of those people, and didn't she just indict Steve Holtze the other day, So I don't know. I just thought it was the most remarkable thing I'd ever seen. I haven't done a lot of criminal law, but I think Chris would agree with me on this. It was just a bizarre legal strategy that she was out on. I think the other thing that was interesting to me was the outcome in the Mueller-Martinez race. I think was a real watershed moment in Harris County Republican politics. I think it was the absolute end of the pay slates, the Steve Holtze, all those guys. That is all over with, it looks like to me, in the Republican primary in Harris County. The tremendous sway that they held in the past, I think that is gone.
Sergio Lira, I want to ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Let's take the Texas Organizing Project branch of the Harris County Democratic Party and Latinos. And then let's talk about, like, Mrs. Dr. Sergio Lira, who I've spoke to personally, worried about public safety. How does the Latino vote, do you think, in Harris County split? I think there are a lot of Latinos who are having second thoughts. I mean, they're not going to vote for someone just because they're Latino. And, Alex is of Spanish descent. So, I mean, what's your take? You had said before that there's a lot of support for her, but how deep does it run? And also, I want to point out that Mark Jones has done polling that has shown Lena Hidalgo's support among African-American Democrats has fallen off a cliff.
Wow.
And so, I don't know. There's your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I just had this discussion last night with some friends over dinner, and, the Latino support, mainly in inner city urban area, is strongly very pro Lina. I mean, there's already, the unions, the Federation of Teachers, there's PACs, Latinas for Lina, Young Latinas for Lina. There's a lot of movement right now in the inner city now. And as you get outside of the inner city into suburban areas, you have more affluent, wealthier, middle class, upper middle class Latinos that are mainly from Venezuela, Colombia, Cuba, and these other countries where they came here to this country and are anti the notion of socialism and those forces. So they're going, and they're also more wealthier, and they're very concerned about higher taxes and things like that. They are leaning towards more of the Republican side and more towards Alexander Mailer. However, the hardcore inner city Democratic base is literally, I would say, about 90% supporting Lina Hidalgo. And
here's the point, though. Sure. The Latino vote is not in the inner city anymore. It's out in the suburbs. Look at what happened in Memorial state rep race out there. Mano Diallo won the Republican primary.
Again,
there's a huge number of Latino voters in the suburbs.
Yeah, but again, that is the more middle class, more affluent Latino, the Cuban American. For sure. From Venezuela, from Colombia,
that's not. There are a lot of Mexican Americans out there too who have done extremely well in this country. I mean, I've got a lot of Mexican American friends who are, about Russell Ibarra or some of those people.
But they're not. They don't seem to be winning in the suburbs as much as they are in the inner city and the urban areas. You have, Councilman Gallegos. You have, Lina, you have, there's a whole different culture here in the urban area.
But but those people don't vote. That's why look at the turnout in the school district races in the areas you're talking about. It's under 5%.
Yes,
If you go to Spring Branch, it'll be 30%.
But that's typical of all runoffs, especially during the March primaries. That is very typical. It's not an anomaly. It's very typical. Now, in the November election, you'll have a huge turnout. What's going to happen is that there's going to be a lot more money, a lot more resources coming in for both camps. And a lot of PAC money is going to come in, out-of-state money is going to come in, that's going to generate a lot of energy and motivation.
Lina's base support are white liberal Democrats.
Yes, they are.
That's really who her base is.
Hey, none of you were on last week's panel, but we brought up the very interesting and for some alarming concept of a guaranteed personal income that Austin has passed. Does anybody have any doubt if we have a second term with Democratic majority that the guaranteed income for those in Harris County will be a pilot program? Any doubt, Holly?
I don't think so if the administration stays the same. And I thought I saw something from our friend Charles Blaine, his urban reform. Didn't have time to read it this week, but it looks like Houston is going to look at a pilot program too for guaranteed basic income. And this is not a great solution, right? I mean, it just it doesn't make any sense, for the people receiving it. It doesn't incentivize them or help them to get to a point where they don't need assistance, and I think
them actually.
Right. And then they're ever dependent.
Let me jump in here for a second.
Okay.
Having become good friends with Andrew Yang over the last year, I've gotten a real schooling on universal basic income, and I'm not a proponent, but I do think it's a more nuanced issue than I thought it was before. Let me just start out and say that universal basic income was originally a conservative think tank idea. It was originally the Heritage Foundation that came up with it, and Milton Friedman, who is the original free enterprise guy, was an advocate for universal basic income. He called it a negative income tax or something like that. The original idea of it was to basically use it to replace existing welfare programs that created disincentives for all sorts of things. There's also a lot of other conservative economists who've been talking about the problems with automation and the replacement of, a whole group of sort of semi to skilled workers with robotics and other things, and that there's going to be some other way to distribute income other than just wages in the future. So it's a complicated topic. I think it's a terrible mistake for local governments to be thinking that they need to be doing this. If you're going to do something, if you're going to do some kind of big reform of the whole welfare system, it needs to be done at a national level and not at the local level. But I will say it is a much more complicated issue than I thought it was when I first started looking at it.
You mean on a national
I think it's a great way
level,
for a city to increase their homeless population.
Go ahead, Chris.
You mean on a national level, filtered down to the states like they're doing now?
Yeah, I think if you're gonna have, look, I think a welfare program, whatever that's gonna look like, I think needs to be a national policy and not a local policy. I mean, I suppose if you went to a state level, that's okay, but to me, it needs to be integrated with the income tax system, and that's
we
what
have a
Milton
version
Friedman,
of that with the earned income tax credits. Where
we do, and that is in some ways similar to what Milton Friedman proposed, was the earned income tax credit. So, but I think that's the way to do it, because if you try to, let me tell you what, you do it locally, it's going to be corrupt as it can possibly be. It's going to be for your brother-in-law and all your friends. It'll just be a complete disaster at the local level. But at the national level, I think we need to have a conversation about, there's a really interesting book called The Second Machine Age, which talks about the center part of the workforce being hollowed out, that we're going to have people with very high skills are going to be in very high demand. And there's a bunch of low skill jobs that basically we can't figure out how to automate, like making up a bed. Nobody can figure out how to create a machine that makes up a bed. And so you got this barbell of workers out there with very little in the middle, which is one of the reasons why there's been so much pressure on the middle class between offshoring manufacturing and automation. Between those two things, you've really hollowed out that middle class, and that there's going to be some way you're going to have to deal with that going forward, because it's not sustainable to have a country where you have very, very rich people and very, very poor people. Society falls apart.
Well,
How does a guaranteed basic income?
We've learned in the last couple of years that there's a huge national security risk to all of this offshoring of manufacturing of critical items, and we need to find a way to move a lot of it back here.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of onshoring, but just to be clear, there's been a lot of studies about, the manufacturing jobs that left the United States. 80% of it was automation and 20% of it was offshoring.
Hey, I have an update on our Sunday survey, unscientific, but always a good indicator of what our viewers are thinking. 70% now saying that they favor red flags and background checks. Yeah. Hey, we've got about 10 minutes left. Folks have a burning desire to talk about any topic real quick. What's on your mind?
I want to jump in about the Trump endorsements, because I've got a little different take on that than Bob did. There's actually a scorecard out there. He won 56 and lost 39. And some of the ones he lost were very high profile. Montana and I'm drawing a blank on some of them right now. But when you look at it, Carl Rowe the other day had this really interesting chart he had done of it, where basically every Trump endorsing candidate, not everyone, but the vast majority of them, got about 30% of the vote in the Republican primary, which, if you recall, is about what Trump got of the Republican primary vote in 2016. In 2016, when he first got elected, it was not that he had a majority control of the Republican Party. He had a plurality, and there were so many other people in the race that he was the one that was way out ahead of everybody else. And Karl Rove was making the point that it doesn't seem like that's changed very much based on these endorsement reactions. Now, I don't know exactly what that means going forward, because if he gets the nomination, then the vast majority of Republicans say they're going to support him, not because they're crazy about Trump, but just based on the alternative of Biden or Harris, whoever it's going to be. I just thought it was a pretty interesting. I thought that Rose's take on it was that basically his level of support in the Republican Party hasn't changed much over time.
Can I just say something? I really love this show because of the diversity of ideas and the respect that we all have amongst each other, even though we have opposing views. But I do want to say one thing about Lina Hidalgo and a couple of things, Mr. Keene. One thing that is positive in spite of the litany of what everyone stated here, there is 20 million investment from Harris County towards early childhood education in Harris County. That's a very important investment because if you start early up the pipeline, you're going to have more success. There are some things that we don't look at. There are some positive things, but I also wanted to say that her supporters are not only white liberals, but the African American strong voting bloc is behind her. And there might be a small dent happening. I don't know what the percentage is or how significant, but she's going to have a lot of support from the African American community. I'm not saying she has eroded some of that. However, I think it's still very significant.
Hey,
Chris,
Brill,
what's
you've
on
got
your
Holly
mind?
muted.
Chris, what's on your mind?
Well, I want to address what some of the things that Bill said about the justice system. While, I've spent almost 35 years dealing with it here in Harris County. And a lot of the problems that we're seeing right now are pandemic related and have been hit hard with the pandemic, and a lot of weather related issues that have hit our courthouses that have piled on top of issue after issue. One of the things that Bill said that I wanted to talk about was the jail. While I'm in tune with a lot of things you said about the current commissioner's court, the current commissioner's court does not inherit the jail problems. They've been going on for years and years and years.
That's true.
It was about 10 years ago that commissioner's court finally tried to pass a bond to build a new jail, and the voters voted it down. And that created more problems on top of problems when the voters refused to build a new jail. And that our jail has been overcrowded for many, many years. And that problem with the jail and the overcrowding has exacerbated the problems in our justice system and the overcrowding of our justice system that has continued. But one thing that I do want to say, last year or year before last, when the judges went to commissioner's court and asked them to go to the legislature and give us 4 new district courts, for some reason the commissioners only asked for 1, and the legislature would have given us 4. And why they did that, I do not know. And those 4 new courts would have gone a long way towards helping us ease overcrowding. We really need about 6 new district courts in Harris County, and we haven't got but 1. And so that would have helped a lot.
Of course, what they are, just switch some of the civil courts over to criminal courts. The civil courts don't have any business these days.
Yeah, and that could be done.
Holly, I think you're unmuted.
Finally, that was fun.
Chris,
My wife wishes she had that capacity for me to mute me.
Did I say something wrong?
I'm pretty sure that's a universal.
Now.
Hey, by the way, before you start, I subscribe to the Texan. I think it's a really good a good source of news. They've done some really good and unique stories. I just want to say that little endorsement.
Yeah.
I like to read Holly's stuff, and in the process, see some of the other reporting they're doing. It's good to have more people poking around at the truth, right,
Yes.
Bob?
Absolutely. More voices, not less, as Andrew Breitbart used to say.
Go ahead, Holly.
No, we have some other staff members. I think I'm probably the least talented member of the team, but there's some young people over there in Austin who do some great analysis of, Second Amendment right issues, also energy grid issues, I love reading Brad Johnson's work, and I always learn something from his articles. So yeah, I hope you guys will check it out. But back to the jail. Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but it does seem like Commissioner's Court is not particularly proactive or active in responding to, of course, they have the federal lawsuit that's pending over the conditions there from the sheriff's union or the sheriff deputies union. That's a really scary issue, and it's not safe for employees. It's not safe for inmates. We've had inmates murdered in that jail, and why they're not doing more about that is a mystery, absolute mystery.
By the way,
All right,
there's an interesting on the jail for a second. There is an interesting dashboard that Harris County Sheriff's Department has about how many people are in Harris County Jail, what they're in there for, the level of offenses. It's really quite interesting. And the big takeaway from me from that is that the people in Harris County Jail today are really bad people. I mean, they're in there for serious crimes. You don't have hot check writers, all this sort of narrative about all these poor people sitting in jail that can't make bail. You look at the crimes that people are accused of that are in Harris County Jail right now, and they are serious offenses in like 90+% of the cases.
Hey, a little breaking news here this week. Our good friend Gary Polland let me know that he's parted ways, will not be representing Steve Hotze. And so we can talk about that offline. As Chris will probably tell us, clients who don't do what you tell them to do shouldn't be your clients, right, Chris?
If they're not going to listen, not going to take your advice.
That's about as far as I can go on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, Chris, do you think that Lena's lawyers knew she was going to go out and do that tweet and that press conference?
I would venture to guess they knew she was going to do the press conference, and I would venture to guess they had no idea she was going to go that far.
Hey, everybody, it's been a difficult week for everyone, and I want to thank you all for being willing to share your knowledge and your voices with us on a very, very difficult subject. Bob, did you have something else to say?
Yeah, I'd like to do my wrap up before we goes out of here. President Biden will visit Uvalde today, and presidents are wont to do that when there's a tragedy like that, and so he will come there and add the comfort of a nation to the people there. But the interesting contrast in that is 50 miles away during the last month, almost 40 people have drowned in the Rio Grande River crossing into the United States. Many of those were infants, toddlers, young children being abandoned on the banks of the river, major abuses of these people. And he will not make that trip 50 miles down the road to talk to people down there and give them comfort and tell that community what he's going to do for them. I've also learned, and this is kind of a teaser here for Breitbart, but I also learned overnight that the president took a very disgusting action overnight in regard to his meeting in Uvalde, and we'll be writing about that later today. I can't discuss it yet, but watch for that.
Okay. Hey, everybody, my respected panelists, but first and foremost, my respected friends. Have a great week.
You too.
Thank you.
Remember why we're here for Memorial Day, too.
Yes.
Absolutely, Bob.
Thanks.